There is a majestic, towering building standing proudly in Flatbush, Brooklyn, that looks like it belongs on the ancient grounds of Oxford or Cambridge. It features intricate limestone carvings, soaring Gothic towers, breathtaking oriel windows, and crenellated parapets crowning the roofline like a fortified medieval castle. If you stumbled across a photo of this architectural masterpiece on a vintage postcard, you would instantly assume it was an elite, private Ivy League university where annual tuition costs more than a suburban house. But it isn't. It is Erasmus Hall, a public high school open to every single ordinary neighborhood kid, built all the way back in 1905. Now drive just 15 minutes away into any classic post-war American suburb and take a hard look at any public school constructed after 1955. What you will see instead is a grim, utilitarian beige rectangle, perhaps 2 stories high, capped with a flat gravel roof, featuring tiny industrial-grade windows, or in many terrifying cases, no windows at all. It looks identical to a low-cost commercial warehouse where corporate entities store excess office supplies or manufacturing equipment. And here is the unsettling detail that almost nobody talks about. Both of these radically different structures were built by the exact same public school system, paid for by the exact same taxpayer dollars, and designed for the exact same demographic of working-class students in the exact same city just 50 years apart. Something cataclysmic happened to the American landscape between 1905 and 1955, a profound aesthetic and philosophical shift that completely transformed the daily experience of millions of children, and almost nobody voted on it. The burning question we have to answer is, what happened? The visionary man responsible for building that breathtaking Brooklyn palace was an architect named C.B.J. Snyder. From 1891 until 1923, Snyder served as the superintendent of school buildings for New York City, and during his legendary 31-year tenure, he personally designed and oversaw the construction of more than 400 public schools. Snyder did not view these structures as mere administrative holding pens. He famously and passionately referred to them as cathedrals of learning. The iconic muckraking journalist Jacob Riis wrote about Snyder's revolutionary impact at the time, stating that he does that which no other architect before his time ever did or tried. He builds them beautiful. Snyder was so deeply consumed by his civic mission that he reportedly did not take a single vacation from 1904 until the day he retired. He broke traditional architectural boundaries, inventing the brilliant H-plan school layout specifically to ensure that natural sunlight and fresh air could penetrate every single classroom on dense Manhattan blocks, and he boldly engineered playgrounds onto school roofs when there was no land left on the ground. More than half of his historic school buildings are still actively occupied today, standing as some of the most beautiful public monuments in the entire city. Snyder's architectural philosophy was entirely deliberate. He firmly believed that a public school building should visually communicate a powerful message to every single child who walked through the front doors, the message that their education, their mind, and their future mattered immensely to civilization. The grand granite carvings, the castle-like towers, and the open courtyards were not wasteful decorations. They were a profound civic statement. Even if your family had just stepped off an immigrant steamship last week without a dollar to their name and you didn't speak a single word of English, you mattered enough that the city built you a literal palace to learn in. That beautiful democratic idea did not naturally evolve. It was systematically executed. It died due to a sudden, devastating collision of 3 historical forces that slammed into the American infrastructure within the exact same 20-year window. The first destructive force was ideological, arriving in 1937 when Harvard University hired the radical German architect Walter Gropius to run their prestigious graduate school of design. Gropius was the founding father of the Bauhaus movement in Germany, an architectural doctrine rooted in the cold, hyper-industrial belief that ornament was an absolute crime, historical references were fundamentally dishonest, and classical beauty was nothing more than a wasteful leftover from the European aristocracy. The Bauhaus philosophy demanded that a building must look like a machine, functional, unadorned, and entirely stripped of human touch. Within a single decade, Every single elite Ivy League architecture school in the United States was completely overrun by this modernist dogma, training an entire generation of young American architects to look at the majestic, inspiring work of C.B.J. Snyder as naive, embarrassing, and old-fashioned. But abstract European ideas do not build thousands of physical schools. Immense capital and shifting demographics do. The second historic catalyst was the explosive arrival of the baby boom. Between 1945 and 1964, returning World War II veterans started families at such an unprecedented, staggering rate that the public education system completely buckled under the sheer physical weight of the population. Elementary school enrollment across the nation, which was already expected to hit a massive peak of 37 million in 1957, completely shattered projections and skyrocketed to a staggering 51 million students. Nearly 45%, almost half, of every single public school building actively standing in the United States today had to be frantically constructed during that brief, chaotic 20-year panic. The federal official in charge of school housing in 1950 issued a stark public warning, stating that the nationwide classroom shortage threatened to become completely chaotic unless immediate, drastic action was taken. American school districts were suddenly trapped in a brutal corner. They could choose to build schools beautiful, or they could choose to build them fast. Caught in an emergency, they completely abandoned permanence and chose speed. Then came the third and final blow, the geopolitical trigger that permanently locked this ugly industrial architecture into the American legal and financial framework forever. On October 4th, 1957, the Soviet Union successfully launched Sputnik into orbit, sending a massive shockwave of pure existential panic through the American psyche. The United States government decided almost overnight that the public education system was failing the Cold War, concluding that the only reason a Russian satellite was orbiting overhead was because American teenagers were falling behind in advanced mathematics and technological development. Congress frantically passed the National Defense Education Act in 1958, unleashing an unprecedented tidal wave of federal cash into public schools. But there was a dark catch written into the legislation. That massive federal funding was strictly earmarked for high-tech science laboratories, language departments, and defense readiness programs. It was explicitly forbidden to be spent on structural school construction, limestone carvings, soaring towers, or anything beautiful that could be seen from the street. By the time the landmark Elementary and Secondary Education Act arrived in 1965, federal funding had permanently rewritten the entire purpose of an American school. They were no longer viewed as sacred civic monuments designed to uplift the human character. They were treated as industrial inputs into a massive national defense calculation. When New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller proposed in 1961 that the state cut costs by using the exact same prefabricated architectural blueprints on every single construction site, nobody even stood up to fight him. The powerful Ford Foundation funded a massive corporate research project called the School Construction Systems Development, which pioneered cheap, identical, prefabricated modular parts that were rapidly deployed across California and then copy-pasted across the entire continent. The official stated goal on the corporate paperwork was to build cheaper and faster, but the unwritten consequence was that every school began looking like an identical factory. A child walking into those windowless concrete boxes learned a radically different lesson from the immigrant children of Snyder's era. They were subtly but permanently taught that their education was not a grand civic honor, but a cold logistics problem to be efficiently cleared. The heartbreaking irony is that modern architectural and cognitive research over the last 20 years has quietly admitted that C.B.J. Snyder was entirely correct back in 1891. Recent data from major cities proves that children are 12% more likely to fail a standardized test on a hot 90-degree day inside a poorly ventilated school than a 72-degree day, and that classrooms flooded with natural light produce vastly superior cognitive and psychological performance. The dark, windowless, prison-like schools built during the late 20th century under the guise of energy efficiency were actively degrading the mental capacity of American youth. We had the formula for perfect, inspiring civic education entirely figured out over a century ago, driven by architects who refused to take vacations because they believed every child deserved to learn inside a palace. And then, we traded it away for industrial speed and corporate uniformity. The majestic cathedrals of learning are still standing out there, heavily protected as historical anomalies, but we completely stopped building new ones. Maybe the real tragedy of modern America isn't just that our schools look like warehouses. Maybe it's that we have trained our children to be entirely okay with that. If this deep dive into the hidden history of our landscape opened your eyes, go watch our previous documentary, Why American Houses Are Built to Fail. Hit that subscribe button right now to help us uncover the truth. And welcome to the Hidden Era. See you in the next video.